What's good? It's Woog. Sometimes we get some really unexpected, cool stuff in boxing. And in this case, it looks like we're getting Shakur Stevenson versus Frank Martin. I'd read the rumors that they had finalized and they had agreed, but now, it looks like Mike Coppinger is basically saying that, they've got the date, or rather a couple of dates. It's going to be one of a couple. It's either going to be November 16 in Las Vegas or December 9th in New York. If it's November 16th in Vegas, that would be just before the F1 or Formula One races in Vegas. And if they do December 9th in New York, I believe that that's the same day as the Heisman, the day that Teofimo Lopez usually occupies. So this will be a 135-pound fight, but it will also be for the then vacant WBC lightweight title, since Devin Haney's moving up supposedly at, I think he's supposed to fight Regis Prograis. They haven't made that official yet, but he has been designated a champion in recess. So one of his 4 titles, the WBC belt, will be up for grabs in this Shakur Stevenson versus Frank Martin matchup. And man, it's weird because Frank Martin is a protege of Errol Spence, and he's aligned with PBC, whereas Shakur Stevenson is affiliated with Terrence Crawford, and Shakur Stevenson is still a top-ranked fighter. So this fight is going to be on ESPN, even though this was a multi-promotional effort to come to a deal to get this one done. So I'm just glad that it's getting done. And although Shakur Stevenson has the reputation of being ready right now to be one of the best pound for pound fighters in the sport, some already have him in their top 10 pound for pound in the sport. I believe I have him just outside of my top 10. And that's really just because it's a tough top 10 to crack. I actually haven't adjusted my top 10 since the Errol Spence loss to Terrence Crawford. So I'd be curious to see whether he sneaks into my top 10 now, but he's definitely one of the most prestigious and one of the most respected current young talents in the sport. He already has a couple of very good wins under his belt, including the title unification win against Oscar Valdez. So he's got the reputation of being able to, a lot of people think he would beat Devin Haney right now. A lot of people think he would beat Gervonta Tank Davis right now. So many people think that he's already one of the absolute best fighters in the sport. Whereas Frank Martin, I feel like his reputation is he can be, but it's like, wait a second. Out of these 2 guys, it's Frank Martin who's got 2 years on Shakur Stevenson. It's not like Shakur Stevenson's already like the established current old guard and that Frank Martin is the next up. No, Frank Martin is 28 years old. Shakur Stevenson is 26. So that just shows you how young both he and Devin Haney were when they first started making a name for themselves. A lot of people were wondering, well, why don't they fight this guy, that guy? I'm like, wait a second. They're 21, 22, 23 years old. They started fighting high profile fights against championship level fighters relatively young. And for Frank Martin, AKA the Ghost, I would say his best win is still probably Michel Rivera, the Ali looking guy. Not to compare him or his abilities in any way to Muhammad Ali, but just pretty much the flat top style haircut and maybe a couple other attributes in his stance. And I mean, he calls himself Ali. So, but that's probably Frank Martin's best win. And that is a good win. And he also, just before that, had stopped Jackson Marinez, who I felt should have gotten a decision win over Rolando Raleigh Romero. But yeah, Frank Martin stopped Jackson Marinez. He dropped Michel Rivera en route to a unanimous decision win where he won all but maybe a couple rounds. He was very impressive against Michel Rivera. And then in his most recent fight, he kind of ran into some difficulty. He fought a very close fight, an unexpectedly close fight against Artem Harutyunyan. I mean, through 8-9 rounds, the unofficial scorecard had Harutyunyan up. This was kind of a scary fight for Frank Martin. He knocked Harutyunyan down in the 12th round, largely to save the day. He won by unanimous decision, and I thought that the scorecards were kind of weird, but this was a very, very close fight between he and Harutyunyan. And I'm sure most people watching the fight on TV prior to the knockdown probably thought that Frank Martin might be in danger of potentially losing that fight. So he's coming off a bit of a scare, which I think reputation wise, it's funny. One fight can skew somebody and change somebody's idea or perception of a fighter. And it doesn't have to be like a Spence Crawford fight where Crawford just dominates Spence in the way that he did and stops Spence to where it has people wondering, damn, what the hell is up with Spence? Is he as good as I thought he was? How good is he going to be going forward? It doesn't even have to be something that dramatic. Sometimes it's just running into one of those unexpectedly tough fights, whether it was a matchups issue, whether it was somebody who maybe you might have underestimated, but for whatever reason, it's a very tough fight. And then when you run into that tough fight, it has people kind of recalibrating their idea of how good you might or might not be. I mean, I remember when Shakur Stevenson had some fights that went the distance against Toka Khan Clary, Jeremiah Nakathila, who lost to Murataya pretty recently, but Nakathila stopped Miguel Burchell. Nakathila's got a mean right hand, but in that fight, Shakur Stevenson kind of, he won a ho-hum style unanimous decision win, but the way that he fought had some people wondering damn, maybe he's not the guy for me. Maybe I'm not as into Shakur Stevenson and his abilities and his style as I thought I was. That happens with a lot of fans as they're adjusting their idea of a fighter fight over fight, because as underwhelming as his decision win against Nakathila was at the time, his very next fight was against Jamel Herring, where he just beat the brakes off Herring. Some people thought Herring might be competitive versus Stevenson. I mean, it was seen as a pretty significant step up opponent quality wise for Shakur Stevenson, and he stopped Jamel Herring in the 10th round. And in those first couple rounds, he had Tim Bradley and Andre Ward saying hoo-hoo because of the work that he was doing. He couldn't miss, and he was fighting front foot. He wasn't circling the ring and trying to make this a tit for tat fight. No, he came forward and started beating up on Jamel Herring, throwing 4 to 6 punch combinations and landing most of them. And I would say from that point forward, people have had a super high view of Shakur Stevenson, even if he did lose his 2 belts on the scale prior to his final fight at 130 against Robson Conceição, the same guy who gave Oscar Valdez some real difficulty after Oscar Valdez tested positive for PEDs. Conceição can't catch a break. He's either fighting somebody who missed weight or somebody who's juicing, you know what I mean? But yeah, Shakur Stevenson is kind of seen to be the creme de la creme of the sport. Frank Martin is the guy who we're kind of wondering, is he ready? Is he not ready? But again, Frank Martin is the older fighter by 2 years. I'm just very glad that they got this fight together. This is Southpaw versus Southpaw as well. I'd be really curious to see if minute by minute, because I look at Shakur Stevenson as being one of the best round winners of the sport, where even in the uneventful rounds where nobody's getting dropped, nobody's getting significantly hurt or damaged or anything like that, just the ones where you're kind of looking at your watch a little bit okay, how much longer we got? One of those types of rounds, I look at Devin Haney as being one of the best round winners. I look at Shakur Stevenson as being one of the best round winners. Quite frankly, in a way that Gervonta Davis isn't. Gervonta Davis lost a few rounds, in my view, against Leo Santa Cruz, against Mario Barrios, and then obviously against Isaac Cruz in a fight where I thought, it was the injury to Gervonta Davis's money left hand that made that fight a lot closer than I think it would have been. But Gervonta Davis, he has lost a few rounds in a few of his fights. Less the case with Shakur Stevenson. He's more so minute by minute, moment by moment, just the sweeter scientist of the two, to where he is basically dictating the terms of the exchange, and he's making sure that he's the only one between the two guys who's landing punches. The other guy who either can't get through, can't get past the jab. They're just having all kinds of difficulties with the angles. Shakur Stevenson is about as good as it comes, or as good as it gets when it comes to that. Frank Martin, he's been, again, he's made an impression on fans as well. A lot of people have a super high view of Frank Martin. He's basically ranked, top 5, top 6 by Ring Magazine in that division as well. So he's nothing to scoff at, which, I mean, this could go a couple of ways. I think a lot of people expect this to confirm their belief on how good Shakur Stevenson is. Once he beats a guy like Frank Martin, then it's certain that he is the cream of the crop, right? That would be the third division, 126, 130, and now 135, where Shakur Stevenson firmly plants his flag as a top 2, top 3 in the division, especially since, Devin Haney left. Teofimo Lopez left. Gervonta Davis is still there, so that would be the other guy who you could arguably say is the best at 135. But Shakur Stevenson would be firmly a top 2 guy in the division. So that would be the third division where he's become a champion and where he's certified a top 1 or 2 guy in that division. So, I mean, by that point, you're kind of like knocking on the door of the Hall of Fame. By that point, you're already basically where Mikey Garcia was before he started making decisions like to fight Errol Spence and stuff like that. And it's arguable Mikey Garcia's case for the Hall of Fame, but Shakur Stevenson would already pretty much be there or, you know, near there with a win over somebody the quality of Frank Martin at this stage of Frank Martin's career too. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how that battle between southpaws goes. I'm going to do further analysis, like as we near the fight date. I'm going to do a full preview. We'll probably do like one of those, you know, I was just thinking, you know, types of videos where you're just kind of analyzing a component or an aspect of the fight that you're starting to give some thought to. And I also want to do like a live chat about this matchup. I want to get your guys' thoughts on Shakur Stevenson versus Frank Martin. So yeah, we're going to do a much deeper dive, but these are just my initial thoughts as they made the fight. What does my gut say in the moment? Yeah, I think I expect Shakur Stevenson to win a decision. Like how handedly? Like, will he be able to pretty much hit and not get hit and control things in the way that he normally does? Like, Frank Martin isn't Shushiro Yoshino. And, you know, Yoshino is a quality fighter. He didn't look quality against Shakur Stevenson, but again, that's more or less a testament to how damn good Shakur Stevenson is. He made Yoshino look like just another guy. Like, Yoshino is the guy who stopped Nakatani in Nakatani's, I believe, most recent fight. Yoshino didn't win a round against Shakur Stevenson and got stopped in the 6th round, dropped multiple times as well. So Shakur Stevenson, I would also say in this division, is looking like he's like hitting as hard relatively or comparatively as he has in any division. I mean, 126, he wasn't anything resembling a knockout artist. Like a lot of people went the distance with him at 126. 130, he seemed like he was sitting on his punches a bit more. 135, he looked like pretty beastly against Yoshino. But yeah, I can't wait to do a deeper dive into Shakur Stevenson versus Frank Martin. Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments. What are your earliest impressions? Will Frank Martin be competitive? Like, and by competitive, I mean this thing could go either way. Or will Shakur Stevenson show that he is a clear tier above Frank Martin? Or do we have this all wrong? And are we perceiving these fighters incorrectly in thinking that Shakur Stevenson should be a substantial favorite? Like, I haven't looked at the opening odds yet, but I would imagine Shakur Stevenson is going to be at least a minus 300 in this one. Like, I'd be surprised if I see him as like a minus 200 or minus 250. I would be surprised like if I saw Frank Martin as like a plus 175 or plus 225. I expect Frank Martin to be like a plus 300. And again, that just shows you what Shakur Stevenson's reputation is in the game. Like, even his adversaries or, you know, opposing promoters and people who don't have stake in his career, everybody has to kind of like acknowledge how good he seems. Like everybody, it's almost unanimous. Like if you were to poll different fans or different trainers, different fighters and so forth, different past fighters, you know, retired fighters. And if you were to like name like 12 different fighters and to poll them on what they think about these different fighters, I'm willing to guess that aside from maybe Terrence Crawford, that he would rank, Shakur Stevenson would rank among the highest in like opinion polls from the boxing community. But yeah, again, let me know what your opening thoughts are on Shakur Stevenson versus Frank Martin in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.